She did not ask for a bed. She did not ask for a meal. She stood outside a stranger's gate on Yemasi Road, with dust on her coat, blood drying at the backs of her heels, and the last light of Beaufort County fading behind the oak trees, and all she asked was whether she could sleep near his goats until morning. Not in his house, not on his porch, not even in his barn. Near the goats. That was the size of the mercy Mara Ellison believed she was still allowed to ask for. Small enough not to offend anyone. Small enough to be refused without making the person who refused her feel cruel. Small enough for a woman who had learned over the last 3 weeks that when people decide you are a problem, they can take your job, your name, your friends, your savings, and finally, your voice, then still look you in the face and call it procedure. But the man who came to that gate did not know any of that yet. He did not know that she had once worn a badge at Broadfield Regional Medical Center in Columbia. He did not know that she had once kept entire departments running with color-coded files, late-night audits, and the kind of quiet competence nobody praised until it vanished. He did not know that she had found numbers that did not match signatures that had never existed, and equipment that had been billed to patients who never received it. He did not know that the truth had cost her everything. And most of all, Caleb Whitaker did not know that before the night was over, this woman would say one company name in his kitchen, and that name would reach into the part of his life he had trusted longest. It would reach past his farm, past his church, past his retirement, past the peace he thought he had earned. It would reach all the way to his own blood. The road was almost dark when Mara knocked on the wooden post beside the gate. Not hard. Not the way a person knocks when she believes she has a right to be heard. Just twice with the side of her hand, then once more because the goats had shifted in their pen and she was not sure the sound had carried to the house. The farmhouse sat back from the road, white paint dulled by weather porch light, glowing pale yellow, a narrow gravel drive bending through live oaks, heavy with Spanish moss. South of the house stood a barn with a tin roof and a fenced pen where a dozen goats moved like soft shadows in the evening. Mara had been walking since before sunrise. Her phone was at 23%. She had $107 folded inside a receipt in her jacket pocket. She had no charger, no room key, no one expecting her. At noon, outside a gas station near Walterboro, she had held a bottle of water for almost a full minute before putting it back because the price was higher than she expected. The cashier saw. A man behind her saw. No one said anything. Somehow, that was worse than mockery. She carried that silence with her. A truck slowed behind her around 4 in the afternoon. Mara stepped off the shoulder and into the ditch before she even understood she had moved. The truck kept going. Nothing happened. No one shouted. No door opened. Still, her hands shook for 10 minutes afterward because fear did not need proof anymore. It only needed memory. So when the porch door opened and a man came out, she almost turned away. He was tall, broad through the chest, with close-cut gray hair, and a face that looked as if it had spent years listening before speaking. He crossed the yard without hurry, boots steady on the gravel, one hand tucked into the pocket of his work coat. He stopped on the other side of the gate and looked at her, not at her torn heels first, not at the bag on her shoulder, at her face. That made it harder. "I am sorry to bother you," she said. Her voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone standing farther away. "I have been walking most of the day. I am not asking to come inside. If I could just rest near your goat pen, I will be gone before sunrise." The man did not answer right away. The goats shifted behind him. Somewhere in the oaks, insects began their night rhythm. Mara kept both hands visible because she had learned that frightened people like to imagine danger in empty hands. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mara." "Mara what?" She hesitated, not because she meant to lie, because names had become dangerous. A name could be searched. A name could be repeated. A name could be handed to the same people who had already taken everything. Mara Ellison, she said. The man nodded once as if the name mattered, because she had given it, not because he recognized it. Caleb Whitaker, he said. Then he unlatched the gate. You are not sleeping with the goats, Mara Ellison. She took half a step back. Sir, I do not want any trouble. You did not bring trouble to my gate, he said. You brought yourself. The words were plain, no sermon in them, no softness added to make him look kind. That was what made them land. He opened the gate wider. Come inside. Mara looked past him toward the farmhouse, toward the porch light, toward a door that could close behind her. Every part of her wanted rest. Every part of her distrusted the cost of being given it. I can stay in the barn, she said. No, Caleb said. Not sharp, not angry, just final. She followed him across the yard because her legs were too tired to argue with certainty. Inside the house was clean and spare. A row of boots stood by the door. A Bible lay closed on a side table beside a pair of reading glasses. There were framed photographs on one wall, but not many. A woman in a blue dress. A younger Caleb in a black suit. A small church with white steps. Nothing in the house seemed arranged for visitors, yet nothing felt cold. Caleb pointed to a wooden chair near the kitchen table. Sit there. Mara sat. He did not ask where she came from. He did not ask what she had done. He washed his hands at the sink, took a pot from the stove, and moved like a man who believed hunger should be answered before questions. The silence in that kitchen was not empty. It was shelter. For the first time that day, Mara let herself breathe. 3 weeks earlier, Mara Ellison still had a desk with her name on the lower drawer, a badge that opened 3 secure doors, and a life that looked ordinary enough to survive. She worked at Broadfield Regional Medical Center in Columbia in patient records, and the kind of department people only noticed when something went missing. Mara had started in the file room 7 years before. She knew the difference between a rushed signature and a forged one. She knew which nurses wrote dates backward when they were tired. She knew which supply forms arrived late and which department heads treated paperwork like an inconvenience until the wrong paperwork saved them. She was not loud. She was not political. She did not enjoy catching people in mistakes. What she enjoyed was order, a chart where every page belonged, a patient account that matched the service provided, a delivery log that could prove a man in a rural county had received the walker billed under his name, or that a retired school teacher had not been charged for a respiratory device she never touched. That was why the first invoice bothered her. It came from Vale Care Solutions, a medical supply vendor Broadfield had used for years. The invoice listed 36 portable rehab monitors, 12 mobility support kits, and 8 home recovery packages. Everything looked normal until Mara opened the receiving report. 21 monitors had been logged. 7 mobility kits had arrived. No home recovery packages were signed into storage. At first, she assumed the missing documents were somewhere else. She checked the warehouse logs, then nursing distribution, then patient discharge records, then the digital archive. Nothing. The next afternoon, she pulled the previous month. The same pattern was there, smaller but clear. The month before that, again. Equipment billed. Equipment approved. Equipment never fully received. By the end of the week, Mara had a stack of printed invoices clipped in 3 folders. One for billing, one for receiving, one for patient assignment records. She stayed late after everyone else left, sitting under fluorescent lights that hummed while the cleaning crew moved down the hallway with rolling bins. The numbers did not whisper anymore now. They spoke. Vale Care had billed Broadfield for equipment tied to Medicare-supported patient accounts, and Broadfield had paid. Some patients were elderly, Some lived in rural townships around Columbia and Beaufort County. Some had discharge notes saying family declined equipment because none had been offered. Others had signatures that looked too similar, as if one hand had pretended to be many. Mara checked her work twice, then a third time. Then she called Naomi Pierce. Naomi worked in compliance review, 2 floors above her, but their friendship had been built in parking lots, break rooms, and late nights when both were too tired to pretend they were fine. Naomi was the one who brought soup when Mara had the flu. Mara was the one who sat with Naomi in the courthouse hallway during her custody hearing and said nothing because silence could hold a person upright. They met in the smallest conference room near the west stairwell. Mara spread the papers across the table. Naomi read for 20 minutes without speaking. The longer she read, the less color stayed in her face. "This is not sloppy filing," Naomi said. "No," Mara answered. "This is federal money." "Yes." Naomi sat back and rubbed both hands over her eyes. Mara expected caution, maybe fear, maybe a suggestion to wait. Instead, Naomi looked at her and said, "You have to report this." Mara looked down at the invoices. "If I am wrong," she said, "I ruin my own name." Naomi reached across the table and touched the edge of the top folder. "Then make sure you are not wrong." Mara nodded. She did not know then that advice can sound like courage even when it is carrying betrayal inside it. Mara filed the first report on a Monday morning. She attached invoices receiving records, patient account numbers, delivery gaps, and a summary written so plainly that no one could pretend the concern was emotional. She sent it through the official channel because that was what the employee handbook said to do. It promised confidentiality. It promised protection from retaliation. It promised that all credible reports would be reviewed with seriousness and care. For 2 days, nothing happened. On the 3rd day, her supervisor stopped making eye contact. On the 4th, 2 people lowered their voices when she entered the break room. On the 7th, Naomi sent her a text that said, "Just breathe. Let the process work." Mara tried. The board announced an internal review the following week. 9 business days later, the review was closed. The memo came at 4:42 on a Friday afternoon, sent to a limited distribution list with careful language and no names. It said, the discrepancies had been caused by temporary documentation failures in the receiving department. It said procedures had been updated. It thanked staff for their continued commitment to integrity. Mara read it once, then again. Then she opened the folders on her desk and stared at the pages that proved the memo was a lie. The second report was longer. She added 4 years of invoices marked patterns by quarter highlighted duplicate patient signatures and included a chart showing the difference between what Vale Care billed and what Broadfield had actually received. She printed a copy for herself, placed another in a sealed envelope, and sent the full digital file to compliance. Naomi called that night. "You really sent it," she said. "I had to." "I know," Naomi whispered. There was something in her voice that Mara mistook for fear. 2 weeks later, Mara was called to a conference room on the executive floor. A man named Victor Harlan sat at the head of the table. He was chair of Broadfield's Oversight Committee, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth while his eyes measured the quickest way to end a conversation. Beside him sat Human Resources. That was when Mara knew. Victor thanked her for her years of service. He said restructuring had created difficult decisions. He said her position was being eliminated effective immediately. He said it had nothing to do with any report she filed. He used the word report as if the papers in her folders were weather rumors. She was given 40 minutes to clear her desk. Her badge stopped working before she reached the elevator. A security guard she had known for 6 years stood beside her while she packed a coffee mug, 2 sweaters, a framed photo of her mother, and the folders she had been smart enough to copy. He looked ashamed, but shame did not move him from the doorway. After that, the world narrowed by inches. Her savings went first. Then the attorney who promised a whistleblower case stopped returning calls after taking the retainer. Then interviews ended strangely always after reference checks. Then her landlord said he was sorry, but could not wait another month. Then Naomi stopped answering every call, answering every third one, then none at all. Mara stayed with an aunt in Orangeburg for 12 days. On the 13th morning, her aunt stood in the kitchen turning a spoon in cold coffee and said she wished things were different. Mara understood. By sunset, she had one bag, $107 a phone without a charger, and a direction that was not really a plan. South. Caleb put rice beans and stewed chicken in front of her that first night, then sat across from her with his own plate and did not watch her eat. That mattered. People watched hunger when they wanted gratitude from it. Caleb did not. He only refilled her water once, pointed toward the hallway when she finished, and told her there was a spare room upstairs with clean sheets and a bathroom across the hall. Mara thanked him, but the words felt too small for what he had given, and too dangerous for what she feared he might still ask. He asked nothing. By dawn she was awake. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then she heard goats outside and remembered the gate, the porch light, the man with gray hair who had let her keep her name. She went downstairs with her shoes in one hand so they would not strike the floorboards. Caleb was already outside carrying 2 feed buckets toward the pen. The morning was pale and cool. Mist lay low over the grass. The oaks held the first light in their moss, like old women holding secrets. Mara stepped onto the porch. "Can I help?" she asked. Caleb looked back once, then handed her a bucket. "Goats know when a person is unsure," he said. "So do people," Mara answered before she could stop herself. His mouth moved almost into a smile, but not quite. "Then, do not let either crowd you." They worked for an hour. Caleb showed without over-explaining. Mara learned fast because she had always learned fast. She filled troughs, checked latches, carried hay, and found the rhythm of small work that did not demand she defend herself. A rusted hinge on the south fence had pulled loose. After breakfast, she asked where he kept his tools. By noon, the hinge was reset, 2 wires were tightened, and the gate no longer dragged when opened. Caleb came by, tested it once, and gave a nod. That was all. Somehow, it felt better than praise. At supper, they sat on the porch steps with plates balanced on their knees. The field darkened slowly in front of them. Crickets began under the grass. For the first time in weeks, Mara spoke without planning every sentence. She told him about Broadfield, about the invoices, about Vale Care Solutions, about patients billed for equipment that never arrived, about the first report, the second report, the Friday memo, the conference room, the 40 minutes to clear her desk, the attorney who vanished, the interviews that died after reference checks, and the aunt in Orangeburg who could not carry one more burden. Caleb did not interrupt. When she finished, he kept looking at the field. "What was the company name again?" he asked. "Vale Care Solutions," Mara said. "Out of Columbia." The plate in Caleb's hands lowered slowly until it rested beside him on the step. "Say it once more." She did. For a while, the only sound was the goats moving beyond the barn. Caleb drew one long breath. "My sister runs that company," he said. Mara felt the porch tilt beneath her. "Then I should leave," she whispered. Caleb turned toward her. "If my family is the reason you came to my gate asking to sleep beside goats, tell me something, Mara Ellison." His voice was quiet. "Which one of you am I supposed to protect?" Mara did not answer because the question was too clean for the mess it touched. She went upstairs after supper and stood in the spare room with her bag open on the bed. Everything she owned fit inside it with space left over. That fact should have made leaving simple. It had made every other leaving simple. A person who owns little can disappear quickly, and for 3 weeks disappearing had felt like the only protection she had left. She folded one shirt, then unfolded it. Downstairs, the old house settled in the dark. Outside, the goats made small sounds in the pen. The window faced the south field, where the fence she had repaired held straight beneath the moon. Mara thought about Caleb's sister. She thought about Broadfield. She thought about every person who had looked away, because looking away was cheaper than knowing. Then she closed the bag without packing it and sat on the edge of the bed until morning. Caleb did not sleep either. He lay in his room with the ceiling fan turning slowly above him and a name moving through his mind. Vale Care Solutions. He remembered Lenora at the ribbon cutting 11 years earlier, standing in a cream suit beside a blue banner, her hand on a pair of oversized scissors, smiling as if the whole county had come to witness not a business opening, but a promise fulfilled. He had prayed that day. He had asked God to let the company serve people who were usually forgotten after discharge papers were signed. He remembered being proud. Pride he knew now could be a blindfold if you tied it yourself. At 6 in the morning, Caleb stood in the kitchen and called his sister. Lenora answered on the 3rd ring. "Caleb," she said, warm and bright. "You are up early. I need to ask you about Vale Care and Broadfield." There was a small silence. Not long enough for guilt by itself, but long enough for calculation. "What about them?" "A woman came to my farm last night," Caleb said. "She worked at Broadfield. She says equipment was billed and never delivered. She says she reported it and lost everything." Lenora sighed softly. Caleb, desperate people tell desperate stories. Her name is Mara Ellison. Another pause. "I know the name," Lenora said. "She caused confusion for a lot of people who were trying to do their jobs. Was it true?" "That is not a simple question." "Make it simple." Her voice changed then. The warmth stayed on top, but something cold moved under it. "Hospitals and vendors have processes you have never had to understand. Deliveries are rescheduled. Paperwork lags. Billing windows close. People outside the system see fragments and think they have found sin. Did Vale Care bill for equipment? Broadfield never received Caleb. Did you? Nobody was hurt?" That answer entered the kitchen and stood between them. Caleb looked toward the window where daylight was beginning to touch the barn roof. Lenora said, "I need you to be careful. A stranger with nothing can afford to burn down a family. You cannot." Caleb closed his eyes. "You just told me enough." "No," she said. "I told you to leave this alone." He hung up without saying goodbye. When Mara came downstairs, he was still standing beside the phone. He told her everything. She listened with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup she had not touched. When he finished, she said, "She is your sister." Caleb nodded. "Then you still have time to stay out of it." He looked at her for a long moment. "Mara, I was in it the moment I opened the gate." 3 days later, Lenora Whitaker. Vale walked into Mount Calvary Baptist Church carrying a covered dish and a sadness that had been carefully arranged before she left her house. Mount Calvary was one of the oldest black congregations in Beaufort County, the kind of place where memory lived in the wood itself. Weddings, funerals, fish fries, school drives, scholarship breakfasts, old choir robes in a back closet, photographs of pastors whose voices people still quoted long after the men were gone. Caleb had preached there for 29 years. Lenora had donated there for almost as long. That was why she came before anyone else could. She did not ask for the pulpit. That would have been too obvious. She asked to speak with a few of the senior deacons after Bible study, just for a moment, just as family. She sat in the fellowship hall beneath a flickering light and placed her hands around a paper cup of coffee she never drank. "I am worried about my brother," she said. Deacon Samuel Price leaned forward, worried how Lenora lowered her eyes. "There is a woman at his farm, a woman in trouble. She has made accusations against a company I am connected to, accusations that have already been reviewed by proper people. Caleb has a good heart. You know that. Sometimes a good heart can be led by a sad story." The words were gentle. That made them more dangerous. She never called Mara a liar. She only left enough space for everyone else to set that word down themselves. She spoke of Caleb's loneliness since leaving the pulpit. She spoke of age grief and how easily a man who missed being needed could mistake dependence for truth. Then she sighed. "I would hate to see this church pulled into something ugly because a stranger learned how to use an old man's compassion." No one at the table moved. Deacon Price looked troubled. Deacon Martin Cole stared at his folded hands. Only Deacon Ruth Ann Bell, 74 years old and sharper than most people half her age, watched Lenora without blinking. Lenora asked after Samuel's granddaughter at Spelman. She promised to send another check for the youth van repairs. She mentioned the scholarship fund. She touched Martin's arm and said his late wife would have wanted the church protected from scandal. By the time she left, she had not raised her voice once. She had not needed to. That evening, Ruth Ann called Caleb. She told him everything. Caleb listened from the porch, looking out toward his dark field, while Mara washed supper dishes inside. When Ruth Ann finished, she said, "I do not know what is true yet, but I know when someone is trying to decide what we think before we are allowed to hear it." "Thank you," Caleb said. After he hung up, he stayed outside a long time. Mara came to the doorway. "What happened?" Caleb turned. "My sister came to the church." Mara's face changed, though she tried to keep it still. "She told them I was using you," Mara said. "No," Caleb answered. "She told them I was lonely enough for you to use me." Mara looked down. "I should go." Caleb shook his head. "She already buried you once at Broadfield. Today she came here to dig the second grave." His voice did not rise. "I will not hand her the shovel." Caleb called Pearl Haynes the next morning. Pearl ran the weekday program on the county's small community radio station, but people listened to her for more than weather road closures and church announcements. Pearl knew who needed a meal after surgery, whose son had come home, which family was burying somebody on Saturday, and which rumors deserved to die before they grew legs. When Caleb gave his name, Pearl got quiet. "I heard Lenora was at Mount Calvary," she said. "Then you heard why I am calling." Pearl let the silence sit. "Are you sure Caleb know?" That surprised her. Caleb looked across the yard at the barn. Mara was by the fence checking the latch she had fixed. "I am not sure what this will cost," he said. "I am not sure who will stand up or who will step back. But I am sure enough about what happened to that woman. And I am sure enough about what my sister is trying to do." Pearl breathed once into the phone. "Sunday morning," she said. Sunday morning, Caleb answered. By Saturday evening, the word had moved faster than any official notice could have. It traveled through kitchen phones, barbershops, beauty shops, grocery aisles, front porches, and the quiet spaces after choir rehearsal. Caleb Whitaker was going to speak at Mount Calvary, and whatever he had to say mattered enough that Pearl Haynes had put her own voice behind it. Lenora came to the farm that night. Her car lights swept across the front windows just after 8. Caleb went outside before she reached the porch. He closed the door behind him so Mara would not have to stand in the sound of his family breaking. Lenora stood at the bottom step in a navy dress and low heels, looking polished enough for a boardroom and tired enough for sympathy. "You do not have to do this," she said. Caleb said nothing. "That woman is wounded," Lenora continued. "I am sorry for her, truly." But wounded people can still destroy things. They can still mistake their pain for truth. Caleb watched her face. "You used to preach about grace," she said. "I did. Then have some." That word did something to him. Grace. Coming from her mouth, it sounded less like mercy and more like a door she wanted him to close. Caleb said, "Grace is not silence." Lenora's expression tightened. "Be careful what you make people choose, Caleb." There it was, not a plea, not quite a threat, something colder because it wore the clothes of concern. "Mama would be ashamed," Lenora said. The night seemed to pull back from them. Caleb looked at his sister for a long time and saw, maybe for the first time clearly, how familiar her face was and how little that familiarity could be trusted. "You should go home," he said. She waited for him to soften. He did not. On Sunday morning, Mount Calvary Baptist Church was full. People stood along the back wall. The old wooden pews creaked under bodies dressed in pressed shirts, flowered dresses, dark suits, and the kind of hats that had seen more funerals than weddings. The choir did not sing long. Everyone knew they were waiting for the same thing. Caleb did not stand behind the pulpit. He stood on the floor in front of the first pew, the same level as everybody else. "For 29 years I preached in this church," he began. "Today I am not here to preach." The room settled. "I am here to say what I know." He named Broadfield Regional Medical Center in Columbia. He named Vale Care Solutions. He named the invoices, the missing equipment, the Medicare supported, accounts the patients whose records showed devices billed but never received. He did not decorate the facts. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed each truth in the room and let it stay there. Then he said Mara Ellison's name. He told them she had filed a report. He told them she had been fired after filing it. He told them she had come to his gate asking to sleep beside goats because telling the truth had taken her work, her home, her friends, and nearly her belief that anyone would hear her. A sound moved through the congregation, not loud but real. Lenora sat in the fourth row, still as carved wood. Caleb looked over the room. "I am not asking you to believe me because you trusted me once," he said. "I am asking you not to let trust become a blindfold. Pay attention to what comes next. Truth does not need applause. It only needs room." When he walked down the center aisle, some people reached for his hand. Some looked away. In the parking lot, Martin Cole passed him without speaking for the first time in 30 years. Caleb felt it. He counted the cost. Then he drove home. In the back corner of the parking lot, a woman named Evelyn Hart sat in a gray sedan with her phone in her hand and the engine off. She had driven down from Columbia before sunrise after 3 people sent her the same message. Caleb Whitaker is speaking at Mount Calvary. Evelyn had worked the healthcare beat at the Columbia Dispatch for almost 9 years. She had written about closed rural clinics, nursing shortages, billing confusion, and patients who chose between medicine and rent because both demanded to be paid first. For 8 months, she had been circling Broadfield Regional Medical Center with a notebook full of almosts, almost proof, almost sources, almost one person willing to go on record. Everyone talked until their name had to appear in print. Then doors closed. Calls went unanswered. Fear came dressed as caution, and caution sounded reasonable enough to kill a story. But Caleb had stood in front of Mount Calvary and said the names out loud. Evelyn waited until most cars had left, then approached him near his truck. "Reverend Whitaker." He turned. "I am Evelyn Hart with the Columbia Dispatch. I heard what you said inside." Caleb studied her press badge, then her face. "Then you heard enough to know I should not be your only conversation. I was hoping you would say that." He did not smile. "Come to the farm." That afternoon, Evelyn sat on Caleb's porch with a recorder between them and asked questions for 2 hours. Caleb answered what he knew and refused what he did not. He gave her Lenora's company name, the Broadfield Connection. The phone call, the visit to the church, the warning dressed up as concern. When Evelyn asked why he would speak against his own sister, Caleb looked out toward the south field, because she was counting on me not to. Then he called Mara outside. Mara came slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel she did not need to be holding. She looked at the recorder, the way a person looks at a bridge that might collapse halfway across. Evelyn did not rush her. "Start where you can," she said. So Mara started with the first invoice. The article ran Monday morning. By 8, it was being shared across Columbia. By noon, 2 regional stations had called. By evening, the state health authority announced a formal review of Broadfield's vendor billing practices. The article named Vale Care Solutions, named Lenora Whitaker. Vale named Caleb Whitaker as the former pastor who publicly challenged the company and named Mara Ellison correctly for the first time since all of this began. Not disgruntled employee, not former staff member, not source of confusion. Whistleblower. 6 weeks later, Evelyn called Mara again. Mara was in the south field tightening a wire Caleb had said could wait. "I wanted to tell you before it publishes," Evelyn said. Mara stopped moving. "Tell me what investigators found a call record. 3 days before your first report was filed, someone at Broadfield called a regional manager at Vale Care." Mara closed her eyes. "Who?" Evelyn hesitated just long enough. "Naomi Pierce." The field went soundless. Mara thanked her for telling her first ended the call and stood with the phone in her hand until the screen went dark. Then she went upstairs to the spare room and opened the last text Naomi had ever sent before the silence became permanent. "Just breathe. Let the process work." Below that from 2 nights earlier, another message remained. "Proud of you. Do the right thing." Mara read it once, then again. Then the breath she had been holding for weeks finally broke. She did not cry when Broadfield fired her. She did not cry when the attorney vanished. She did not cry when she put the water bottle back. But now, sitting on a borrowed bed with those words glowing on her phone, she folded over and wept. Caleb heard from downstairs. He did not climb the steps. Some grief has to find its own floor first. Later, when Mara came down, he set coffee beside her and said only one thing. The friendship was real. She looked at him. "So was what she did," he said. "Both can be true. That is why it hurts." What followed did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like mail. It arrived in returned calls, sealed envelopes, statements, quiet resignations, and names removed from walls without ceremony. It arrived slowly enough that Mara learned something she had not known before. Consequences can be real even when they do not feel like revenge. The state review became a federal investigation once Medicare-supported billing was confirmed. Vale Care Solutions was placed under outside control while investigators traced years of invoices, delivery records, signatures, and payments that had moved too cleanly to be accidents. Lenora Whitaker Vale stopped appearing at breakfasts. Her seat at charity luncheons sat empty. The Youth Health Fund removed her name from its banner on a Wednesday morning. No announcement was made. 2 volunteers climbed ladders, unfastened the sign, and carried it through the side door. That was how communities survived shame. Not by speaking all at once, but by allowing certain silences to change shape. Broadfield Regional Medical Center issued its statement 6 weeks later. Mara read it at Caleb's kitchen table. The language was formal, careful, and late. It acknowledged that her original report had been accurate. It acknowledged that the hospital had failed to protect a reporting employee. It acknowledged that her termination had been wrongful. Victor Harlan was gone by then. So was the old oversight committee. Mara set the paper down and stared at it. For months, she had imagined that being believed would feel like standing up after being held underwater. Instead, it felt quieter, heavier. The statement gave her back her name, but it could not return the nights she spent afraid to answer unknown numbers. It could not return the job she loved before it became the place that erased her. It could not return the version of Naomi she had trusted. Caleb poured coffee and placed the cup near her hand. "You thought it would feel bigger," he said. Mara nodded. Truth coming late still has to walk past everything. "It failed to prevent," Caleb said. She folded the statement and slid it back into the envelope. Under whistleblower law, Mara was confirmed as the original reporting party of record. Because the fraud involved government healthcare funds and had continued for years, recovered money would be substantial. Months later, a check arrived with a letter explaining her share. Mara held the envelope on the porch before opening it. The goats grazed beyond the fence. The hinge she had fixed still held. When she finally saw the number, she did not cheer. She covered her mouth and closed her eyes. It was not happiness first. It was the body realizing it could stop running. 3 days later, Caleb called Dr. Elise Warren at Beaufort County Rural Health Services. She ran the county's mobile health program and needed someone who understood both patient care and the systems that failed patients when no one watched closely. Caleb gave Mara's name. Elise called the next morning. The interview lasted 40 minutes. The offer came that afternoon. Mara accepted on a Thursday in November. On her first day, she parked the mobile clinic van on Yamasee Road before turning toward her first stop. The engine hummed under her hands. In the back were blood pressure cuffs, intake forms, wound care kits, sample medications, folding chairs, and a small printer that would probably jam before noon. 17 patients waited across 4 townships. People who had been driving 45 minutes for basic care. People who had stopped driving and started hoping. People who deserved records that matched reality supplies that actually arrived, and someone who would notice when a number did not sit right. Mara looked down the road toward Caleb's farm. She thought of the night she had stood at that gate and asked to sleep near goats because she believed that was the safest amount of mercy to request. She thought of Caleb opening the latch. She thought of a plate of food placed in front of her without questions. She thought of Naomi's message still saved in her phone because erasing it would not make the pain cleaner. Then she guided the van onto the road and drove toward the people waiting. At the farm, Caleb was already in the south field. The morning was cool. The goats moved through wet grass. The repaired fence line ran straight under the pale sky. He had lost things. A sister, as he thought he knew her. The comfort of being respected without question. The peace of old age untouched by conflict. But he did not look like a man ruined. He looked like a man who had learned late in life that every sermon he had ever preached had been waiting for one ordinary morning when belief would need hands agate and a cost. Mara Ellison had come to Yamasee Road asking for less than she deserved. She left with her name restored, her work returned, and the knowledge that truth, when given room, can still find its way home. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved, you share it with someone who once did the right thing when it cost them something real. In the comments, tell me where you are watching from. Have you ever met someone like Caleb Whitaker, someone who opened a gate when the world had closed every door?